Hi guys, we just wanted to say hello from Harrogate, from us the Sharps.
Hello.
Happy New Year and best wishes for 2021.
These are really strange times that we find ourselves in at the moment, aren't they? But it's really great to have this opportunity to connect with you in this way.
Hi everyone, really good to be with you all this morning. Sorry that I can't be with you in person. Hope you're all doing really well. I've been quite excited about this message actually. Just wanted to share with you just about Abraham in the Bible. In a time when Abraham gives the keys of his life over to God. I know he does that quite a lot, but this is a specific example of that. So it's time before Abraham had his name changed to Abraham. It's a time when Lot was still travelling around with Abraham. So the two families had been abundantly blessed by God over this period, and they'd got so big that there was strife breaking out between the two families. So Abraham and Lot go up a mountain basically to try and come up with a solution to this. So we'll jump straight into Genesis 13:8. So Abraham said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between you and me, and between my herdsmen and your herdsmen, for we are brethren. Is not the whole land before you? Please separate from me. If you take the left, then I will go to the right, or if you go to the right, then I will go to the left." And for me, there's two things going on at the top of this mountain, these two men looking out, surveying the land. The first thing that stands out is that Abraham is forfeiting his rights here, really, because he's the older person in the family, he's the leader of the family, he's the wealthier of the two men, and really he has the right to say to Lot, I'm going to choose this best bit of land, and you're going to have to take this bit of land over here. It was Abraham who had the calling from God in the first place, when he left his home to follow God's will, and it very much says that Lot went with Abraham, not the other way around. And yet, Abraham doesn't do that. He doesn't say, this is the bit I'm going to take. He actually gives that choice over to Lot. And he almost says, I'll basically take the leftovers. If you go to the right, Lot, I'll go to the left. If you go east, I'll go west. And he's doing this because he's a peacekeeper, basically. He says very clearly to Lot, let there be no strife between you and me. He doesn't want to fall out with his kin. And the second thing for me is that at the top of this mountain, Abraham is very clearly trusting his life into God's hands. And the thing about trust and courage and faith, these big events in our lives, it's quite hard looking back to remember just how big that decision was that we entrusted to God. Or when we read these stories, we kind of know the end of the stories, don't we? But we have to remember that Abraham, at this time, at the top of this mountain, he doesn't know how it's all going to work out. He's given this decision to Lot because he feels it's the right thing to do. But he doesn't really know how this is going to work out, does he? It could end in disaster for him. And in those days, everything was tied up with land, wasn't it? The quality of the soil would determine the quality of the crops that you'd grow, what sort of animals and livestock you could have, and therefore how wealthy you'd become, yourself and your family. It would determine what your reputation was in the area, the status of you in the area, the legacy you could leave your children. It would determine kind of what your neighbours were like, so where you pitched your tent would determine what the neighbours were like, what your borders were like with the next land. Was there wars on your borders, or was it friendly? And land is just so important, isn't it? The plot of land that we chose back then was so important, and it is now, isn't it? So if you move house, you're often looking kind of for an outstanding school, perhaps, or a nice, easy commute to work. All these things. And yet, Abraham, instead of making his decision himself, he let Lot make that decision for him, basically. Would any of you kind of let your nephews or your nieces or your brothers or your sisters-in-law make that decision for you of where you were going to live and which plot of land you were going to have? Would you let your parents make that decision, or your neighbours? I know I wouldn't, but it's exactly what Abraham's doing here. And it looks on the face of it like Abraham is giving the keys of his life into Lot's hands to decide on his behalf. But of course, what's really happening is Abraham is giving the keys of his own life over to God to decide what happens, and he understands that. He knows that whether he goes to the right or the left or the east or the west, God is going to go with him in that, because he always has. And I had a picture of a raft as I was reading this, and I thought it's a little bit like Abraham is being put onto a raft with no steering wheel, no motor, and all it can do is float down this stream of God's will. And Abraham, what he needs to do is just lay back, kick up his heels, and God will look after that journey for him. He doesn't need to drive that boat. And I can relate to this in a small way, looking back at when our family left Devon and moved up to Yorkshire, where we are now. And I remember my boss saying to me at the time, he thought I was absolutely mad for making this move. And he said, nobody leaves Devon to move to Leeds. Everybody wants to go the other way, from Leeds to Devon. And that kind of really stuck with me, because he was right, wasn't he? And it was a bit crazy. And sometimes during the difficult times over the last 4 years, it's kind of come back to me, those words, and I thought, kind of, have we really done the right thing? Was I misled? Were Alex and I sort of deceived in this? But the truth is that we knew that God was going with us in that move, that it was the thing that we were to do at that time, no matter how hard it was. And he has been with us, he did come with us. And it felt at the time, those of you who were close to us will remember, it wasn't the easiest of moves. It felt like we were almost uprooting an oak tree out of the ground as we tried to leave Ottery, because we had so many roots into so many great things, and Alex and the boys particularly sort of into the schools and friends, and as a family into the church, and our families were close by. And we were hauling this massive oak tree out of the ground, and it wasn't straightforward. And then even after we got up here, we were almost left this oak tree. God almost said to us, kind of, right, you've got that tree now, what I want you to do is chop it into logs, lash it together with some flimsy string, and I want you to put your lives onto that raft, and just trust me with that flow. And I will go with you, but you need to trust me. Kick up your heels and trust me. And that's kind of the feeling that we've had for a number of years up here, which has been both terrifying but exhilaration as well, and he's come true. He's been in full control a lot of the time, which has been great. So there was Abraham at the top of this mountain, and it wasn't easy for him to give up control. It never is. Nobody wants to be on a rudderless raft with no steering wheel. We all want to be driving, don't we? But Abraham was able to look back over the toils and snares that he'd been through during his life, and he thought, God's been with me, he brought me through those things, so why would he not continue to do that going forward? Who else is better than to trust in God? Why would he let me down now? And I think that so often in life when we make decisions that maybe we've made a decision already about something, and we get on our hands and knees then and ask for God's blessing on that decision that we've already made. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's a great thing. There's other times in life when we feel like we've got a desire, a heart's desire inside us that God's put inside us, or a dream right inside us, and we pray and pray, maybe for months, maybe for years, about this heart's desire that's in our heart, and asking for God to bring it to fruition. And I'm a big fan of that. I think that's fantastic, and God definitely does that, and that's a great thing to do. But there's also other times in our life when we're just faced with a blank sheet of paper, maybe a bit like this year. I feel a bit like this going into 2021. I mean, following on from last year, which was so crazy, kind of what does this year, what is it going to bring? It's a plain piece of paper. And we can trust God with that blank piece of paper. And we can kick up our feet sometimes and just say, God, we trust you. You've never let us down before. And we trust you with wherever this is going to go, wherever you want us to go. And I trust that you will come with us. And this image of going back to Abraham sort of giving up his rights at the top of that mountain when it was really him who should have been making that decision. It reminded me a bit of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he really didn't want to go to the cross. We kind of hear him praying out to his Father and asking for that cup to be taken away from him. And in the end, he's led away by men who took him where he didn't want to go, effectively. Like a lamb to the slaughter, it says in Isaiah, doesn't it? And for anyone looking on at Jesus' story at the end of his life there, they might think, oh, what a mess it was at the end. I mean, this guy gave the keys of his life to the Romans and the Pharisees, these people who kind of either hated him or were indifferent about him, and let them choose what he did, and didn't even try and escape. But really we know that he wasn't giving the keys of his life over to the Romans and the Pharisees, whether he was giving the keys of his life back to God, his Father. And thank goodness that he did for all of us, really. And he said to God, your will, not my will, Lord. And what a fantastic outcome. So let's go back to those two blokes at the top of the mountain, Abraham and Lot, and read on in Genesis 13, 10-13. And Lot lifted his eyes and saw all the plain of Jordan, that it was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord. And they separated from each other. Abraham dwelt in the land of Canaan, and Lot dwelt in the cities of the plain, and pitched his tent even as far as Sodom. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against the Lord. And here we see that, given that decision by Abram, by his uncle, Lot then lifts his own eyes up to decide, where am I going to live? And it's like he doesn't lift his eyes very high at all, really. He just kind of looks over the edge of the mountain at what's right there in front of him, obvious. And his eyes are immediately drawn to this bit that's well watered, almost looks like paradise, and thinks, yes, that's what I'm going to have. That's where I'm going. But really, what looked like paradise was superficial. We know that Sodom is like a byword for sin. It was rotten to the core. And Lot doesn't seem to involve God in this decision. He just kind of is led by his eyes. Biggest decision of his life, perhaps. And he doesn't even give a second to ask God to be involved in that decision. It's almost like he packs up his removal van and speeds out of there before Uncle Abraham will change his mind and thinks, I want to win here. And then look at Abram's reaction. So reading on, it says, "And the Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, lift your eyes now and look from the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward and westward, for all the land which you see I give to you and your descendants forever." And look at the contrast here. We read just then that Lot lifted his own eyes up to make his decision. Lot lifted his own eyes up. But for Abraham, he didn't lift up his eyes until God told him to lift up his eyes. And it's almost like Abraham was perhaps at the top of that cliff and Lot had sped off and taken his land, made his choice, and no doubt Abraham was filled with these doubts. Have I made the right decision? Should I have done that? It felt like the right thing to do, but how is this really going to end? And maybe he was a bit looking down, cast down his eyes and a bit in anguish. And it's like God sweeps in like a father and whispers into Abraham's ears, lift up your eyes, son. Lift up your eyes, son. Don't just look at what you've lost. Don't just look down there. Don't just narrow your view. Look at the way I see things. Look to the north and the east and the south and the west. Raise your view up. But like what Bruce was talking about a couple of weeks ago when he said about we've got an upward call to high places, these mountains that we need to climb to be close to God. Abraham very definitely is in that place, isn't he? He's done this fantastic decision of trusting God. He's no doubt having some regrets, and God sweeps in, doesn't he? And his perspective has changed. And he doesn't need to look at what in front of him because he has this enormous promise. And we'll read on the promise here actually. So God says to him, and I will make your descendants as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Arise, walk in the land through its length and its width, for I give it to you. And how good is God comes sweeping in right when Abraham needs him most, just when those doubts are coming in, just when, just in that silence, when he's not sure what's going to happen. God doesn't wait around, he comes in and reaffirms that promise. And the amazing thing about Abraham is that whenever he gives something up in the Bible, you'll read, whether it's his son that he's willing to sacrifice for God, or the keys to his life, like he's given to God, he sacrifices that decision. He always receives fresh revelation from God, and the promise again comes in. Really, really encouraging. So there's a whistle stop tour. I just wanted to end with a bit of a blessing over us all today, that you may know what it means to entrust your life to Jesus. May God help you change your perspective this week, whether it's in the really big things or the small things that we deal with each day. And that you may be able to look back after all of this and say, do you know what? The best decisions of my life were the ones that I entrusted into the hands of Jesus. Thanks for listening, guys. Bye for now.